Okay, I'm here with Kevin King from Sprout Social. Kevin, please introduce yourself and tell us about Sprout Social and what you do there.
So I am Kevin King, the marketing lead for Bambu by Sprout Social, which is an employee advocacy platform that we launched last year. Sprout Social is a social media management platform. We have over 17,000 customers. For anybody not familiar with social media management, Sprout allows you to aggregate all your social profiles and publish and engage from one place, and making it easier to basically build and engage that audience that you have. Target anywhere from small businesses to enterprise, so it kind of runs the gamut in terms of like social media management.
Cool. So I was looking at the client list. So a lot of big names here: Hyatt, Bentley, Ticketmaster, UPS, and I'm noticing a big bent towards B2C type applications and clients. But I do see Box on there, which I consider a B2B type client. Can you tell us a little bit about how a social media management software can be applied in a B2B context?
Yeah, so really it's about still just engaging, right? And creating relationships and establishing relationships and building on those through engagement. Sprout in general leans on engagement and also customer care. That's like the big benefits that we push and emphasize. But basically for B2B, it's easy just to engage, build relationships. Sprout can easily identify relevant new potential businesses and profiles that you want to connect with. And then it makes it easier to respond and engage quicker. So it's really just about building up relationships. The same thing as it would be for anything else, if that makes sense.
And do you find that an individual at the B2B type company is managing that social media management software, or is it multiple salespeople or multiple marketers that are trying to harvest leads and create engagement through a social media channel?
So it depends. I mean, the size of the company is obviously going to play a big part of that. But it's usually a person, one person, and then they would distribute out to a team of people. Typically for like something like social selling, you're talking about like acquiring leads. That's not something that Sprout really facilitates. That's actually something that Bambu really facilitates, which is a whole separate thing. Yeah, it'd be more from like the just social media manager who owns that and publishes and engages and everything. To speak specifically to that social selling and acquiring leads thing though, through Bambu, which is the other platform, you can get salespeople into the platform and they can share content out to their social networks, and then they can start engaging people to acquire leads. So that's kind of how we spin it that way.
And I'm sure you guys get this often. It's a question that I think is on marketers' minds, especially in the post-2010 world, right? Measurement, ROI. How does Sprout and or Bambu think about measuring success when you're talking about improving a metric like engagement, right? How do you guys talk about it, and what's that conversation like with your clients when it comes to the question of, hey, how many leads did you deliver? How did you impact my sales funnel? What does that look like for you guys?
Well, I mean, from engagement, we have reporting that we've created around that. So obviously when it comes to engagement specifically, it's about timeliness, like response rate, average time of response, and making sure that as it relates to acquiring leads or ROI, just any type of ROI, it's really just about having the proper tracking in place with your Google Analytics to make sure that everything you're sharing out, you're tracking back appropriately through, UTM parameters and all that type of stuff. So it's really just about having your house in order in that regard, and making sure that you're tracking it back.
And do you typically advocate doing the last click attribution model for clicks coming through the Bambu or Sprout Social platform? Or are you doing more of like hey, this person has engaged at some point, and doing more of a multi-touch attribution model across the buyer journey?
We typically look at last click, just because that's just kind of standard. There's ways that we look at the multi-attribution aspect of things, and we want to get better at that. That's one of the things that we're always trying to figure out how to get better at, because it's kind of hard to pinpoint that down. Google Analytics has a lot of great reporting on that, but still, last click it makes it easier to just be like, hey, that's where this came from, and you can follow that back, as opposed to like trying to figure out what the start was and then trace that back to the like actual conversion.
Sure. So let me switch gears a little bit. Tell me about the biggest marketing challenge you're facing as you enter 2017.
Yeah, well, it's just really, I mean, growth. But for Bambu specifically, it's really trying to build that thought leadership in a space that's like still kind of evolving, and getting more and more people interested in employee advocacy, which is what Bambu supports. And that's kind of difficult because it's a niche concept. So as opposed to Sprout, which is social media management, that's like much broader, right? We can talk about social media management as it relates to like any industry. It like applies to every business. People are doing it in some way, whether it be like, locally they have multiple franchises or whatever. Employee advocacy is very, very specific. So like really building awareness is a very difficult thing, because we're trying to, attach that to other concepts that are larger than employee advocacy in ways that make sense. So really trying to get ourselves out there. But yeah, really just kind of building that awareness in a significant way. I know that's kind of general, but I
think that's really appropriate because, I often talk about the spectrum between brand awareness and direct response campaigns when it comes to the marketing mix. And I think a lot of marketers, especially those in the demand gen position, are really focused on direct response. And sometimes it can be a bit elusive. It's hard to remember that by building brand awareness, you ultimately make your lead generation easier on yourself, easier on your team, all the way from your SDRs to capturing form fills on your website. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious, how do you think about that? How do you balance the tension between brand awareness, sometimes doing untrackable campaigns, versus a very targeted CPC campaign, capture that search intent, get them to fill out a form, let's start pounding them with sales calls. How do you navigate that spectrum?
Well, I mean, we're really testing. So test out every strategy we possibly can, whether it be a direct response, CPC, paid social campaign, or search. We're trying everything we can. It's kind of what we're learning is that with this niche concept, you're probably very familiar with this, considering the fact that account-based marketing and who you're targeting, that's a longer sales cycle, and also like research cycle from like the buyer journey, basically the buyer journey. So like from discovering your platform, reading the necessary materials and all that type of stuff, and nurturing that journey all the way up to conversion. So it's really just about like testing and trying to see what works. If it's, hey, let's send people to a landing page to download a guide. Well, do they know enough to like actually go and download that guide right away? Maybe we need to test sending them to a few other pieces of content before we send them to the guide. So it's really trying to like test every possible way we can think of to get to the result that we want, and that we can optimize.
Now, do you ever get testophobia, where you're testing so much? It's, someone on the team proposes something, and then the inevitable response is, yeah, we'll test it. Do you ever get that sometimes knee-jerk reaction of, oh God, not another test?
Yeah, well, yeah, kind of. That's what we do a lot. We talk a lot about testing, and we do put out a lot of tests. And sometimes it's like we need to kind of do a gut check and be like, is this even testable? Or are we just saying test to test because we know that we should be testing? It's interesting too, because we've learned a lot with Bambu growing basically from nothing, because it's a separate website, it's a separate platform, it's everything. It's a whole separate brand almost. In the early stages, we wanted to test, but it was actually not appropriate because traffic was lower. You're not really going to get the results that you want, and tests will take way longer to actually complete. So you're just like, okay. So we had to actually stop testing for a while, and now we're back to testing. So it's kind of like that constant struggle back and forth. Test, not test. Test, not test.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. So yep. you mentioned that you recently launched Bambu. I think it's been maybe a year or so. Tell us, kind of walk us through that marketing launch strategy for Bambu. How did you think about it? What pieces were ultimately executed? What pieces maybe fell by the wayside strategically as you started actually putting troops on the ground and executing the strategy?
Yeah, I mean, ours was, so my core competency, or at least what I came up in, was my background is SEO and content marketing. So much like that's the backbone of any marketing strategy or launch. That's where we started. We started with a really small website. We did a really launch to our Sprout customer base, announcing it, and then made sure we had the foundation in place on our website with a blog and some gated pieces of content to really make sure that we were building up to something. So it was pretty straightforward in terms of like a launch. We probably could have spent more time on some paid search stuff, some paid social stuff. But as time goes on, we build that out. So, but when we started, it was really focused on, content marketing through blogging and really kind of going back to what I said earlier, attaching employee advocacy to those adjacent marketing concepts that can apply to employee advocacy, and then going from there, as well as building out really foundational evergreen pieces of content on the blog. So, like really answering those top of the funnel questions about like, what is employee advocacy? What is employee engagement, another benefit that we sell? What is social selling? And really explaining those in depth really positioned us well now, because those are pieces that rank really well in search and really fill the top of the funnel for us.
So now when you map out all this content that you're trying to produce for your blog, in advance of a launch, how much content do you like to prepare in advance of a launch, right? I know some people will put up 5 blog posts and we're good to go, let's launch it. Others I've heard will pre-write, maybe 50 blog posts that maybe they'll launch the site with 15 already ready, and then they'll start dripping out a little bit of content, multiple times a week to create that flywheel or some of that pre-traction on their blog or on their site. How did you guys think about that?
That's a good question. We actually did backlog a bunch of content. So like when we launched, we had, I think like it was somewhere between maybe 7 to 10 articles ready. So like those key foundational ones I was talking about, like what is employee advocacy? What is employee engagement? About like 7 to 10 blog posts. And we had about like 2 to 3 gated pieces. So like guides. We wanted to make sure that, when we launched, we had like 4 published already, and then we had a few that we could drip out over the next couple of weeks. We're kind of different than Sprout in the sense that Sprout publishes many times a week, and we are like once a week. So backlogging for us is a pretty easy, although we're still shooting from the hip a lot of the times. I would love to say that like we have tons of content just like ready to be published over the next few months, but no, we have our roadmap and we have ideas. It's about just getting those created and then published. So I think as long as you have at least the roadmap, you're good. But always having some foundational pieces of content backlogged is always going to be way more comforting. Like for example, right now we're actually we're on kind of a blog publishing freeze because we just can't. The holidays are going to be slower, and December in general is going to be slower. So we're taking that time to backlog as much content as we can. So like first the year comes, we're hitting the ground running with content, and also it's getting the most visibility it can. You don't want to waste a lot of great content during a time that may not be appropriate for your audience. So that's kind of how we're approaching it now.
So given that you kind of came up in SEO, how do you advise marketers to sit tight and wait for their content to generate some kind of return on investment? I know a lot of great marketers out there who will write great content, and then they'll start looking at the number of page views that they've received, and they're saying, well, where are the page views? I delivered the content, it's great. Where are the people? Where are the leads? And everyone, of course, knows that content is evergreen, that it produces return on investment over a long period of time. But everyone still has a little bit of that immediacy requirement, right? How do you advise marketers to just sit tight and wait for the results to come?
Well, so that's where it's something I struggled early on when I was focused on SEO, because I didn't have my hands in other aspects of our digital marketing strategy or any marketing strategy that I was working on. But it's really getting that, again, foundation set up. That's what kind of SEO does. Builds this really like great foundation to fill your funnel, and also different parts of your funnel, but also then getting your paid campaigns set up, because those are the things that are going to be able to like counterbalance the fact that you're not necessarily getting a return out of like content right away. So like if you can get, as long as obviously you have keywords that make sense for paid search, and you have creative for paid social that makes sense, you can do all that stuff on the side, depending on your budget, and then just kind of like balance the conversions that way, and then content will start to grow and build an audience, because you can see a piece of content maybe start to rank really well that starts driving traffic in maybe like 2 to 3 months. So it's kind of like finding that balance, if that makes sense.
But it's got to be pretty tough to do CPC campaigns, lead gen campaigns on a new category like employee advocacy, because people aren't necessarily searching for that. So how do you think about preparing a CPC campaign for a new category type product?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're also still building that up. It's a good thing. So like right now, I'd like to think that at least our content that we're putting out, I mean, we came out at a time where employee advocacy is starting to be a more kind of trending topic, and it's grown over the past 1.5 years. But when we did start, like to your point, there weren't a lot of keywords for paid search that made sense, and we're still even trimming down what those are and what those campaigns are. It's then you need to, if that's the case, you need to focus on paid social, or even organic social, like in balancing those two, because paid social you're allowed to target and segment so specifically that you can test a lot of different ways there's that word again. Test a lot of different ways to get people in the door and start talking to you. But yeah, that's definitely the way to go, I'd say, because at the end of the day, like you can see like employee advocacy, our platform, it targets marketers and other job functions. In LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, you can target job functions, job titles, a demographic. Like Facebook is crazy in terms of like the type of targeting you can do. So you can really, really, really get specific about who you're putting your content in front of, and then that gives you a lot of insight into like where you should be spending your time, even with paid search and your content.
So that gives us a great point to transition and talk about maybe account-based marketing, being able to target specific job titles that you're interested in, and presumably some platforms such as LinkedIn or even ListenLoop allow you to focus in on specific accounts that you're interested in. Are you currently pursuing an ABM strategy at Bambu?
Yeah, actually, we've been thinking about it for a while. It's just something that requires a little bit more buy-in, and obviously, as you know, it's a bit more strategic. You need to align with sales, so it's really kind of getting our house in order in regards to that for implementing it. But yeah, it's definitely something we're thinking about and excited for in the next year or so, because I think it makes the most sense for enterprise targeted platforms and audiences. So yeah, it's that. It's really the big thing though is the sales and marketing alignment that we need to get in order, and then we can move forward.
So you're not alone in that. We hear a lot of marketers talking about that specific piece, the buy-in required to get multiple team members to coordinate on a strategy, right? It's not just the marketing team who's executing a strategy. Now it's multiple departments. So tell me a little bit more about that. What is it that you think makes it hard to get the house in order and to get multiple departments in line?
Well, so I think that if any marketer has worked with sales, they know that sales has thoughts and opinions on who the audience is and who they should be going after, and they have their, who they ultimately just who they want as a customer. Sometimes that doesn't jive necessarily with who the audience actually should be. Sometimes it does. So it's really kind of like making sure that you're communicating to understand, hey, we've done the research marketing to understand who the audience is, and these are the right potential customers. And then getting on the same page, coming up together with a good target list of prospects, and then going after them. So it's really about kind of figuring and coming and aligning on that like targeted list of prospects, I guess, which would be the crux of ABM, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you really nailed it on the head. That's one of the biggest challenges that teams are facing, I think, before they implement their account-based strategy. And one of the biggest tools I've seen to really get people to align is actually signing an internal contract, some kind of, call it a social contract if you want, between sales and marketing, that the two departments have come together, they have met, they have discussed who they want to go after, why, and having the lead of each department sign on a paper that says, we are committing to this much resources or this much time in this particular segment for these particular customers. And I think that creates some kind of psychological commitment on both parties to say, okay, we're both in it for the long haul. This is not going to be a short, 1 or 2 month campaign. And if it starts to not look perfect, I'm out of here. I got to get back to wherever I was doing before, which seems to work. That's something that we've seen is pretty special. It's hard to do, but does generate a lot of commitment and creates more cohesion between the departments.
Yeah, and that's actually why I think ABM, as I know it's become a more hot topic over the past couple of years, and strategy a lot of people want to like explore, and that's part of why we're looking at it or thinking about it. But it's because in general, sales and marketing should be aligned anyway. And this is kind of a strategy that like forces, probably not the right word, but you have to be aligned. And I think that's why it's good, it works, because that's going to be able to scale everything a lot quicker. Revenue, leads, revenue, growth, all that.
What would you say is another challenge facing the Bambu team as they try to implement an account-based marketing strategy?
Well, so with account-based, like it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier about being such a niche concept. We could put our message in front of the people that we want to be in front of, but they still might not necessarily understand what we're talking about. So the struggle would be coming up with messaging that we know is going to be put in front of the people we want to talk to, but like that actually resonates immediately. That makes them want to talk to us. I mean, I guess that's like the biggest problem with any strategy like this. But like, for example, we did a direct mail campaign this past year, and that's a similar strategy, right? We had a list of people we wanted to go after, and we sent them a specific thing that had a specific message that wanted them to do a specific thing, action. And that's really tough, like here's your one shot to get in front of someone. What do we say to them? So it's really about, I think, messaging and how you introduce something that's new. I'd say it's probably even just as hard for anything that's like more established. How do you stand out?
Yeah, absolutely. Every marketer has their own challenges, that's for sure. Okay, great. So I guess I'm curious, we'll leave our audience with this little tidbit. What would you say is the most interesting thing you've learned about marketing in the last year as we close out 2016?
Ooh. I think this might be the right answer, but not that there's a wrong one. But like your assumptions are never assumed, I guess, in marketing. So going into this, when we launched and preparing everything, we have a lot of ideas as to like who our platform can appeal to, because we're like, yeah, we know that this is going to benefit this department and this department and this and all that stuff. It's don't go off assumptions. Try and test or actually ask people questions, like get real feedback from whoever it may be. If you have customers or if you have a couple customers, ask them. If you can just do a survey, just don't assume, because like when we came out, we had those assumptions, and we've had to trim down our messaging and narrow it down a little bit because assumptions aren't necessarily the way to go. I guess if that makes sense.
That's awesome, Kevin. Thank you so much for the time today. Join us next time as we interview more marketers and hear about their trials, tribulations, successes, of course, as well. And Kevin, do you want to leave us with anything before you say goodbye?
Oh, no, just thanks for having me. Obviously, anybody, if you're out there interested in employee advocacy, check out Bambu, Bambu by Sprout Social. It's at getbambu.com. And also, if you're in the market for a social media management tool, check out Sprout Social at the parent company's website. And that's pretty much it.